At dinner, my son-in-law hit my daughter. His mother clapped and said, "That's how women learn." My blood went cold. I stood up without a word, took out my phone, and made one call. They had no idea who they were really messing with. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Boone Keller had driven this road so many times he could have done it with his eyes closed. The houses out here were neat and spaced evenly apart, with young maple trees lining the curb and American flags on a few front porches. It was the kind of suburb that looked like nothing was wrong. That was Boone had come to understand over the past year exactly the point. He parked his truck at the curb and sat for a moment. The engine ticked and cooled. A kid down the street rode a bicycle in slow circles, not going anywhere in particular, just moving. The sun was still high for mid-afternoon, and the air smelled like cut grass and warm pavement. He sat with both hands in his lap and looked at the end of the row. Tamsin's townhouse was the last one. The lawn was mowed tight, almost military in its precision. Not a single dandelion, not a blade out of line. The flower beds along the front walk were weeded clean. The curtains were drawn across every window, front and back. Boone had noticed that detail on his last two visits and said nothing. He had been noticing more and more things that he said nothing about. He was 61 years old. He had calloused hands and a lower back that ached in cold weather and a face that people tended to read as hard, though he never meant it to be. He had spent 33 years as a mechanic, not running a shop, just working in one, doing the job correctly every time without shortcuts. That kind of work taught you patience more than anything. It taught you to look at something and understand what was actually wrong before you picked up a tool, because fixing the wrong problem always costs more in the end. He grabbed the paper bag from the passenger seat. 2 pints of ice cream from the shop on Mercer Street. Mint chip for Tamsin, which had been her order since she was about 8 years old. Strawberry for the kids. He had remembered without asking. He walked up the front path and knocked. There was a pause longer than there should have been. He could hear movement inside, soft footsteps, unhurried, and then the brush of something against the other side of the door. A pause. The deadbolt turned, and then the chain slid free. He hadn't consciously registered the chain on his last visits, but now he thought about it and realized it had always been there, always on, even in the afternoon. The door opened. Tamsin stood in the gap. She was 31 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and Boone's chin and a way of holding herself that had changed in the 3 years since she got married. She used to have a smile that took up her whole face, the kind that arrived slow and warm and made strangers smile back before they even knew why. That smile had been gone for a while now. What replaced it was something smaller and faster. A smile that appeared and disappeared in under a second, trained and controlled, like a door opened just wide enough to confirm there was something on the other side. "Dad." The smile came and went. "I didn't know you were coming. Thought I'd stop by." He held up the paper bag. "Brought ice cream before it melts." Something crossed her face then, a flicker of something genuine, warm, the person she used to be surfacing for a half second. Then it was gone, and she stepped back. "Come in." She was wearing a light blue top with sleeves that reached past her wrists. The weather was warm, mid-July, thick and humid, the kind of afternoon where the air sat heavy and even the shade didn't offer much relief. Boone noticed the sleeves the moment he stepped inside. He had noticed them on the last visit, too. He filed the detail away the same way he had been filing everything else, quietly, without showing his hand, adding it to the growing list of things he was keeping track of. The inside of the house was clean. Not just clean, arranged. Every surface was cleared. The throw pillows on the couch were lined up in a perfect row, all at the same angle. The children's toys were put away, out of sight. There were no dishes in the sink, no crumbs on the counter, no shoes left near the door. It looked like a photograph of a house, a staged version of a life, not the life itself. It didn't look like a place where 2 small children actually lived and ran and made noise. Owen was 7. He was sitting at the dining table with colored pencils and a piece of paper, his head bent down, not looking up when Boone came in. Lila was 4.5. She was in the living room near the couch, arranging small plastic animals into a quiet line along the edge of the coffee table, moving each one with careful concentration. She looked up when Boone walked in and held both arms out to him without saying a word. He set the bag on the table and picked her up, and she put her face against his neck the way she always did. "Hey, little one," he said quietly. "Hi, Grandpa." Owen looked up then. He gave Boone a nod, the kind of nod you give a coworker passing in a hallway, not a grandfather who drove 40 minutes to bring you ice cream. 7 years old and already that guarded. Boone kept his face easy and sat Lila back down on her feet. "I brought ice cream," he said. "Strawberry for you too." Owen looked toward the kitchen. Then he looked toward the hallway leading to the back of the house. Then back at Boone. "Is it okay?" Owen asked. The question hung in the air. Boone held very still. He felt the weight of that question, not what it meant on the surface, but what it meant underneath. A 7-year-old boy asking permission from his grandfather to eat ice cream that his grandfather had specifically brought for him. "It's okay," Tamsin said quickly, already moving toward the kitchen. "Of course it's okay. Come and get some." Boone set Lila down and watched his daughter move. That was the word that kept coming to him lately. Move. She was always doing something with her hands. Adjusting something, wiping something, carrying something from one room to another. She never stopped. She never settled into a chair with any ease, never sat back, and just existed without purpose. It was the movement of someone who had learned, over time, that standing still drew attention. He stayed for dinner. Tamsin had already started cooking when he arrived, and he sat at the kitchen table and talked to her while she worked, the way he used to years ago when she still lived at home. She answered in short sentences. She kept her back to him for most of it, checking things on the stove, adjusting seasoning, moving with that same constant purposeful motion. Grady Holt came home at 6:15. He came through the front door without knocking, which was technically his right since it was his home, but there was something about the way he did it. The door swung open and hit the wall. The keys landed hard on the entry table, not placed but thrown. It was less of an entrance and more of an announcement, a declaration that the room had changed ownership. Grady was 42. He had broad shoulders that were going soft, a square jaw, and a handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long, like he was deciding something about you while he held it. He worked in commercial property sales. He was good at it by all accounts. Boone had spent most of the past year quietly piecing together what kind of man was good at that particular kind of work. The kind who understood leverage, who could read a room, who knew how to present himself in the way most likely to get what he wanted. "Didn't know we were having company," Grady said. Not angry. He was almost never angry in front of people. He was something else, firm in the way a wall is firm. There was no give, no accommodation. You ran into it, and it wasn't personal. It just didn't move. "I called ahead," Tamsin said, not looking at Grady. That was not true. Boone said nothing. "Should have given me more notice," Grady said, and moved to the refrigerator, took out a beer, and sat down at the head of the table. "I had a long day." His mother, Velma Holt, was already in the kitchen. She had arrived an hour before Grady, which meant she had a key to the front door, and she had immediately established herself in the kitchen, nudging Tamsin aside at the stove with a quiet suggestion about the heat setting. Velma was in her mid-60s, compact and precise, with silver hair pulled back tight and small, quick eyes that moved around every room she entered as though she was taking inventory. She didn't speak to Boone during the first 30 minutes of the visit. When she did, it was a question about whether he wanted more water, delivered in a tone that made the offer feel like a small test. Dinner was chicken and roasted potatoes and green beans. Tamsin served Grady first, then the children, then Velma, then Boone, then herself. She sat at the far end of the table, nearest the kitchen, and she ate almost nothing. She kept getting up to refill Grady's glass, to cut Lila's food into smaller pieces, to get a paper towel when Owen spilled a single drop of juice, which he apologized for immediately before anyone said a word. Every time Tamsin sat back down, she looked like she was bracing herself to have to stand again. Grady spoke mostly to Velma. He talked about a commercial lot south of the city, a deal he was negotiating. He used numbers and industry terms in the casual way people do when they want you to understand that they handle important things. He did not ask Tamsin a single question during the meal. He spoke across her, around her, as though she were furniture that happened to be in the room. Boone ate slowly and watched all of it. "Owen, sit up straight," Grady said, without looking at the boy. Owen straightened immediately, without complaint, without any expression on his face. "Lila, stop playing with your food." Lila's hands went still. The children did not look upset. They did not flinch or tear up or look to their mother for reassurance. They just complied, instantly, quietly, without pushback. And that was the part that bothered Boone most. They did not look upset. They looked accustomed. Toward the end of the meal, Tamsin started to say something. It was nothing significant, just a comment about the neighbor's dog getting out of the yard again. Her voice was light, trying for casual. She got about half a sentence out before Grady began talking over her about something else, and she stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. She just stopped, picked up her fork, and looked at her plate. Velma glanced at Tamsin and said, quietly and pleasantly, "That's just how it goes, hon." Not a comfort, not a reprimand, just a confirmation. This is how things are. Adjust accordingly. Boone looked at his plate and kept his face flat. After dinner, the children were sent to their rooms. Velma moved to clean the kitchen, waving Tamsin off when she tried to start. Not unkindly, just decisively, the way you wave off someone who is doing a job that belongs to you. Grady settled into the living room with his phone, legs stretched out, the posture of a man who had finished with the evening. Tamsin stood in the space between the kitchen and the living room, not quite in either place, her hands at her sides. Boone sat in the armchair near the window and watched his daughter standing in that gap. He thought about a different doorway. His workshop back home. Tamsin at 10 years old, standing in the entrance with 1 foot in and 1 foot out, watching him work and asking questions about every single thing he did. Why did the engine make that sound? What did that part connect to? Could she try? She had always been like that, leaning toward things, pressing forward, curious about how the world worked. Now, she stood in a doorway of a different kind, and she was not leaning toward anything. He was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when she came in to put away the leftover food. Grady was in the living room. Velma had stepped outside to make a phone call. For a moment, it was just Boone and Tamsin, and the only sound was the refrigerator and the faint noise of the television from the other room. Tamsin reached up for the high shelf above the counter, both arms raised to slide the Tupperware into place, and her sleeve slid back. Boone saw it. The bruise wrapped around her wrist like a band. Dark, the kind of dark that had passed through purple-black and was settling into that greenish yellow that meant it was several days old. Wide, not a single line from a corner or an edge. This was the shape of a grip, the kind of mark that comes from someone's fingers closing around something they intend to hold. His hand, resting flat on the counter, went still. He did not gasp. He did not move. He did not let his face change by a single degree, because he understood, in the part of him that had been paying careful attention for months now, that if she saw his reaction, she would shut down. She would explain. She would reassure. She would put up every wall she had, and by the time she was done, the moment would be gone, and they would be back where they started, him on the outside, her behind the glass. He finished filling his glass. He set the faucet off. He set the glass down. He waited. Tamsin lowered her arms and pulled the sleeve back down without looking at him, with the automatic speed of someone who had done exactly that motion hundreds of times. She turned toward the refrigerator. "Tamsin." She paused. Her back was still to him. "Look at me." She turned slowly. Her face was arranged, careful, neutral, with a quick small smile already loading and ready to deploy. "You need something, Dad?" He kept his voice low and even. "Your wrist." She looked down at it, then back at him. "I bumped it." "On what?" "A door." He held her gaze and said nothing. The refrigerator hummed. The television murmured from the living room. "It doesn't look like a door," he said. "Dad." She stopped herself, glanced toward the hallway, then back. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely above a breath. "Please don't start anything. Please. Not tonight." "I'm not starting anything," he said. He took one step toward her, no more. "I'm asking you a question." Her eyes filled. He watched her blink it back, fast, controlled, and turn her head to the side for a moment. When she looked at him again, she was steady. Barely, but steady. "I'm okay," she said. "Things have been tense. That's all. It won't happen again. He looked at her for a long moment. Has it happened before? She said nothing. He let the silence sit. She said nothing. That was his answer. The kids, she whispered. Her voice cracked on that word. Just a hairline fracture, quickly sealed. I can't lose my kids, Dad. You understand what I'm saying? If I do this wrong, if I say the wrong thing, or I leave without a plan, or I make it messy, his lawyer will take everything. He will make me look unstable. He has been building a case against me in his head for a long time. I know him. I know exactly how he thinks. She paused. I can't lose them. I would rather. I can't lose them. Boone's chest felt like something heavy had been lowered into it and left there. He understood what he was hearing. She was not a woman who had not thought about leaving. She was a woman who had thought about it so carefully, so many times in the dark hours when the kids were asleep, and she was still and finally allowed to think. She had thought about it until she understood exactly why she couldn't do it the way she'd want to. Not alone, not without preparation. She had already done the math 100 times, and the math kept coming back wrong. Please, she said again, just let me handle it. I'm working on it. Okay, he said. She looked at him, waiting for more. There was no more. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. I hear you. And he meant it. Not because he agreed to stand still and do nothing, but because he understood now completely what kind of problem this was. And problems like this had exactly one right approach. And it wasn't anger, and it wasn't a loud conversation in the kitchen while Grady Holt sat 20 feet away in the next room. He said goodnight to the kids. He shook Grady's hand. He told Velma the food was good. He walked out to his truck and drove home in the dark. He didn't turn on the radio. He drove with both hands on the wheel, and the window cracked and the warm July air moving through the cab, and he thought about everything he'd just seen, and he let the anger come. He let it rise up full and hot, and then he set it down. He needed it contained. He needed it useful. Anger without direction was just noise, and noise would cost his daughter everything. The first thing Boone did when he got home was find a notebook. Not his phone, not a laptop, not a document on a screen that could be deleted or hacked or found by someone looking. A plain spiral-bound notebook from the kitchen junk drawer, the kind with the black and white cover. He sat down at the kitchen table under the overhead light, and he wrote down everything from that evening in careful, dated detail. The time he arrived, the curtains, the sleeves, the dinner, what Grady said and how he said it, Owen's question about the ice cream, Tamsin at the end of the table, and then the bruise when he had seen it, what it looked like, her exact words, the order of the conversation. When he had finished with that evening, he went back. He pulled earlier visits from his memory and wrote those down too, as precisely as he could manage. The visit in April when Tamsin had answered her phone in another room and come back into the living room with the careful movements of someone who had just been told something. The visit in May when Grady had cut off her sentence at the dinner table and she had not even tried to finish it. The visit in June when Owen had fallen and scraped his elbow in the backyard and Tamsin had looked at the back door before she went to him, checking whether she was allowed to react. He wrote until the notebook had 5 pages. Then he closed it and put it in the drawer under some old mail and went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time. He thought about Tamsin at 16, after her mother passed. She had come into the kitchen every morning and made coffee. Not because he asked her to, but because she had understood that the house needed someone to do it, and she was going to be that person. She had been 16 years old, and she had held that household together with her bare hands while she was still grieving. That was who she was. That was the person Boone had raised. He thought about her at 25, calling him from a highway rest stop somewhere in Michigan, laughing about something that had gone wrong on a road trip. Her voice when she laughed, full and unguarded, filling up the phone. He could not remember the last time he had heard her laugh that way. He thought about the day she'd introduced him to Grady, and how Grady had been careful with him. Almost too careful. Deliberate. Not warm, exactly, but precise. The kind of careful that meant he understood Boone was someone who would need to be managed, and so he was managing him. Boone had noticed it at the time and written it off as nerves. He was not going to make that mistake again. The anger was there. He had no intention of pretending it wasn't. It sat in his chest like something with edges, and he acknowledged it, and he did what he had always done with that particular feeling. He put it somewhere it could be useful. He had spent 33 years in a small shop with his hands and broken engines, and the steadiest rule of that work was this: you do not force a part. You do not reach for the hammer when you need to turn a bolt. You do not take shortcuts because you're frustrated. Anger is information. It tells you where the problem is. It does not tell you how to fix it. He was not going to let anger run this. Not with his grandchildren's custody on the line. Not with his daughter's life in the balance. He chose patience. He would be the most patient man in the room. Over the following weeks, Boone started showing up at the house more often. Not for long visits, never dropping by at dinner time, never pressing for conversation. He came to fix things. There was always something. The gutter along the back of the house had been separating from the fascia board since spring, and he brought his ladder and his sealant on a Saturday morning and got it done while Grady was at work. He replaced the flickering light fixture in the upstairs hallway that had apparently been blinking since January. He helped Owen build the model solar system that had been assigned in school, spending a full Sunday afternoon cutting foam balls and painting them different colors while Lila stood at his elbow and suggested improvements. These were reasonable, ordinary visits. No one could object to them, and they gave Boone a reason to be in that house, in the rooms, watching. He watched Grady with the studied attention of a man who has decided to understand something. He watched the way Grady moved through the house with a slight forward lean, the posture of someone who considered every room an extension of himself. He watched the way Grady's voice changed when he was correcting the kids, not violent, never violent in front of others, but precise in a way that carried an edge. He watched the way Tamsin's body changed whenever Grady came home, the slight tensing across her shoulders, the way her hand would stop whatever they were doing and then start again, more carefully. He watched Owen. Owen, at home in that house, was a different child than the one who showed up at Boone's place on weekends. At home, he was contained, small, economical with his words and his movements, like a boy who had learned that taking up too much space was a mistake. At Boone's house, he ran. He left his shoes in the middle of the floor. He asked questions without stopping to measure whether each one was welcome. He was loud sometimes and clumsy and entirely himself. And the difference between the two Owens, the one at Birch Court and the one at Grandpa's house, told Boone more than any specific incident could. Lila was too young to adapt the way Owen had. But even at 4, she would go quiet when she heard Grady's car in the driveway. She would gather her toys and stop making noise, not because anyone told her to, but because she had learned the shape of the house's moods. Boone documented everything. He had a system now, brief notes in the car before he drove away from each visit, more complete entries at the kitchen table that night. Dates, what he had observed, what had been said. He photographed bruises when Tamsin allowed it. She didn't always allow it. When she refused, he wrote that down too, including the date and the reason she gave. His neighbor Doris had retired from social work 10 years earlier, and one evening Boone knocked on her door and asked if he could talk. He didn't give her details. He gave her enough for her to understand the shape of the problem. She listened without interrupting, and when he was finished, she said, "You need a family law attorney who handles abuse cases specifically, not just any family lawyer." She gave him a name. He called Rhett Carver on a Tuesday afternoon, parked in a lot behind the auto shop, eating his lunch. Rhett was not a warm man. He was in his late 40s, lean and methodical, with a voice that moved at the same measured pace whether the subject was routine or urgent. When Boone laid out the situation, the bruises, the control, the children, the years of it, Rhett didn't express outrage or offer sympathy. He asked 3 questions. Was there documented evidence? Was Tamsin currently willing to leave? Was there a record of any prior incidents? Boone answered honestly. Some documentation, uncertain on her willingness, unknown on prior incidents. "Don't move yet," Rhett said. "I know. I need you to really understand this. Any confrontation, physical, verbal, any kind, and he turns around on you and on your daughter. He will paint her as volatile. He will paint you as an interfering, unstable presence who is manufacturing the crisis. He probably already has a version of that story ready. Men like this prepare. Understand. Good. If you build this carefully documentation, pattern, timeline, and if you can get her to a point where she is willing to come forward, this man does not get those children. Not full custody, Likely not even meaningful partial if we do this correctly. Boone sat with that for a moment. Then he said, how long? Can't say exactly. Depends what comes in. Could be weeks. Could be the situation forces your hand before that. If at any point she's in immediate physical danger, you call me that same night. Boone said he would. He thanked Rhett, finished his lunch, and drove back to work. That night at the kitchen table, he added Rhett Carver's name and the substance of the conversation to his notebook. A few nights later, he drove past the house on Birch Court at 8 in the evening. He did not stop. The curtains were drawn. The lights were on upstairs, Owen's room, and the soft glow of Lila's moon-shaped night light visible through the thin curtain. He sat at the curb for 2 full minutes, watching those 2 rectangles of light, and then he put the truck in gear and drove home. He was not sure he had ever done anything harder than that. Driving away. It was a Wednesday in late August when his phone rang at 9:47 at night. Tamsin. He picked up before the second ring. She didn't say hello. She said, Dad, and the way she said it told him everything before she got to the next word. Low. Fractured. Barely holding together. It was the voice of a person who had been keeping something enormous in place for a very long time and had just felt it start to give. He was up and moving toward his keys before she got the next sentence out. He locked me in the bedroom, she said, because I didn't answer my phone fast enough when he called. He took my phone out of my hand, and he went out and locked the door from the outside. Where are you now? He left. Him and his mother. They got in a car and drove somewhere. And Owen, her voice broke on the name. Owen found the spare key, she said. The one we keep in the drawer in the hall. He slid it under the door for me. A 7-year-old boy had slid a key under a locked door to free his mother. Boone's jaw tightened. He said nothing about that. Not yet. The kids are with you right now, he said. Yes. We're home. Are you hurt? A pause. I'm okay. That's not what I asked. A longer pause. I'm scared, Dad. Her voice went quiet and steady in a way that was somehow worse than the cracking. I've been scared for a long time, and I'm tired. I'm so tired of pretending I'm not. He was already out the door, keys in hand, the night air hitting him, still warm from the day. You're not going back tonight, he said. Not you, not the kids. A silence on her end. He could hear Owen's voice somewhere in the background, low and careful, saying something to Lila. He'll come back, Tamsin said. And when he comes back and we're not there, I know, Boone said. That's okay. We'll deal with that. Right now, listen to me. Pack what you need for 3 days. Clothes for you and the kids, medications if there are any, the kids' school things if it's quick. Just what you can carry easily. Don't go through every drawer. Pack fast. Okay. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 16. She opened the door and she looked like herself again, not the arranged, managed version of herself that she presented in that house, but the actual person underneath it. No makeup. Her hair pulled back loose. Eyes still slightly swollen from crying. She had a backpack over one shoulder and a smaller tote bag in her hand, and she was wearing an old sweatshirt that Boone was almost certain had belonged to her mother because it had been in his house for years, and then one day it was gone. Lila was pressed against Tamsin's right leg, one hand gripping the hem of the sweatshirt. Owen stood one step behind his mother, backpack on, looking at Boone with an expression that was working very hard to be calm. The expression of a child who has watched adults deal with serious things and has decided to try to help by not making it worse. Boone held out his hand to Owen. The boy looked at it for a second, and then he reached out and took it. Good man, Boone said quietly. They walked to the truck. He strapped Lila into the back seat, and Owen climbed in beside her. Tamsin took the passenger seat. The truck was quiet. Boone drove. Nobody said anything for several miles. The streetlights came and went. The city thinned out as they drove, the blocks getting wider, the trees bigger. Lila, in the back seat, had fallen into the slow, half-asleep breathing of a very young child who had been through a frightening evening and was only now, finally, in a place where she could let go. Owen sat straight, looking forward, his hands in his lap. About 3 miles from Boone's house, Lila said sleepily, Are we going to Grandpa's house? Yeah, Boone said. We are. Okay, she said, and closed her eyes. He called Rhett Carver at 10:15 that night. after the kids were asleep in the spare room, and Tamsin was sitting at his kitchen table with a blanket around her shoulders, staring at a cup of tea she hadn't touched. He left a message. Rhett called back in 9 minutes, which confirmed for Boone, again, that he had chosen the right person. They were in Rhett's office the next morning at 8:30. Tamsin had slept. Not well, not long, but she had slept. Boone had made her eat something before they left. Toast, at least. The kids were at Doris's house next door, eating cereal and watching a nature documentary about birds, which Doris had chosen with the quiet precision of a woman who understood exactly what the children needed that morning. Rhett's office was plain and functional. A dark wood desk, 2 chairs for clients, a bookcase along one wall with organized binders, a window that looked out onto the parking lot. There were no plants, no framed quotes, nothing designed to make you feel better about being there. Boone had decided the first time he visited that this was the right kind of office for this kind of work. Comfort wasn't what you needed. Results were what you needed. Tamsin sat with her hands folded in her lap, fingers knotted together. She was wearing one of Boone's old sweatshirts because she hadn't packed enough for the building's air conditioning, and it was 3 sizes too large on her. She looked young in it. She looked, for a moment, like the girl who used to sit in his truck and tell him everything. Rhett walked her through the documents without detour. Divorce filing, emergency custody petition, protective order application. He explained each one clearly, in plain language, without minimizing or dramatizing. He explained what would happen when Grady was served, what Grady's likely response would be, what the court process looked like, and what documentation would be needed going forward. Tamsin listened without interrupting. She asked one question near the end: what happened if Grady didn't comply with the restraining order? Rhett explained that as well, clearly, without softening it. When he finished, Tamsin sat very still for a moment. The room was quiet. Outside, a truck backed out of space in the parking lot and drove away. If I sign these, she said, it starts. Yes, Rhett said. There's no way to start it and then slow it down if I change my mind. Correct. Once he's served, it's in motion. She looked at Boone. He met her eyes directly, the way he always had. He didn't nod or prompt her. He just looked back at her and let her make the decision. You told me once, she said, that when an engine is running wrong, the worst thing you can do is keep running it. You have to shut it down before you can fix anything. He didn't remember saying those exact words, but he had probably said something like it. It sounded like something he would say. Yeah, he said, I need to shut it down. She reached for the pen. Her hand was trembling, not slightly, actively trembling, the kind of visible shake that comes from sustained stress finally being acted upon. Boone watched it and said nothing. Then he reached out and placed his hand over hers, not to stop the shaking, not to take the pen, just to be there, to make it clear that she was not doing this alone and had not been doing it alone for quite some time. She pressed back against his palm for just a moment. Then she took a slow breath. The shaking steadied. She signed all 3 documents. Her handwriting was clear and certain. Rhett collected the papers without ceremony and turned to his computer. Boone looked at his daughter. She was looking out the window at the empty parking lot, at the square of pale morning sky. Something in the set of her face had changed. Not relief, not quite. It was too early for that, but something had been put down. Some weight she had been carrying that she was finally allowed to set on the floor. He drove her back to his house. He made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, and she held the mug with both hands, and they listened to the morning dove that had been calling from the maple tree in the backyard every morning that summer. That slow, round, unhurried sound. How long were you planning this? She asked. Before last night, I mean. A while, he said. Since you saw the bruise? He thought about it honestly. Before that. The bruise made it clear. But I started paying attention before that. She turned her mug slowly in her hands. I thought I was protecting them. Staying quiet. Keeping things smooth. I kept thinking if I could just manage it well enough, if I didn't push too hard or react too much, it would stay at a certain level. It would stay manageable. I know, he said. I couldn't let myself think about what it was doing to them. To Owen. Because if I thought about that, I didn't know what I would do, and I needed to keep functioning. For them. So she stopped. She looked at the dove in the tree, though she probably couldn't see it from where she was sitting. You were surviving, he said. That's not a small thing. Surviving, keeping those kids fed and calm and okay. That was a full-time job, Tamsin. It didn't leave room for anything else. That's not your fault. That's what that kind of situation does to people. She looked at him. You're not behind, he said. You got to the other side. That's what matters. She pressed her lips together. She didn't cry. She just held the mug and listened to the dove, and eventually she nodded once, slowly, the nod of a person putting something behind them. Grady Holt did not react the way most men would. There was no scene at Boone's doorstep that night. No calls to Tamsin's phone. The number was blocked now, and a new one had been issued. No car driving slowly past the house. Grady was smarter than all of that. He knew, probably within the hour he was served, that everything he did from this point forward was being watched. So instead of reacting, he prepared. 3 days after being served, he appeared in Boone's driveway at 7 in the morning, alone. Parked precisely at the curb. Walked up and knocked the way a man knocks when he believes the house owes him an answer. Boone opened the door. Grady was dressed for work, pressed and put together, hands in his pockets. He looked like a man who had been mildly inconvenienced and had come to resolve it through reason. I like to talk, Grady said. There's nothing to talk about between us, Boone said. Your attorney can call Rhett Carver. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Grady said. The comm held perfectly. I think someone has put ideas in her head that your attorney, Boone said again, can call Rhett Carver. Something shifted in Grady's expression. Just for a second, his jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Not loud, not threatening, but with something showing through the surface that had always been there underneath it. You're making a mistake, he said. You don't know what's actually been going on in that house. She's not well. She hasn't been well for years. I have been the one keeping things together, keeping her together, and you're going to destroy what's left of this family because you can't see the whole picture. Drive safe, Boone said, and closed the door. He stood in the hallway and listened to Grady's footsteps go back down the path. The car door, the engine, then nothing. Then he went to the kitchen and wrote down every word of the exchange, with the time and the date, and called Rhett to report the visit. In the weeks before the first hearing, Grady's strategy became fully visible. He had hired a well-regarded downtown family law attorney, and together they filed a counter-petition that was precisely worded and aggressive. It claimed that Tamsin was emotionally unstable, that Boone was an undue outside influence who had manipulated her into leaving, and that Grady was the primary stable presence in the children's lives. There were statements from Velma describing Tamsin as anxious, prone to overreaction, and frequently overwhelmed by ordinary parenting demands. There was a notarized letter from someone described as a longtime family friend, a name neither Tamsin nor Boone recognized, describing Grady as a devoted, patient father. They were well-crafted documents, the kind that could land on a judge's desk and begin shaping an impression before any testimony was heard. Rhett reviewed all of it without visible concern. This is what we expected, he said. They have paperwork. We have evidence. He submitted Boone's documentation. Every entry from the notebook, organized into a formal timeline spanning 14 months. Dates, observations, direct quotes with context. 2 photographs of bruises, with dates and Tamsin's written account of each incident attached. A written statement from Boone that was specific and measured and contained nothing that was not verifiable. He also submitted Doris's statement. Boone had not known she was writing one until she appeared at his door with the sealed envelope one morning and pressed it into his hands without saying much. He read it on her front step. It was 3.5 pages, written in the clear, careful prose of someone who had spent 30 years observing children and families in crisis. She described what she had seen during the weekends when Tamsin brought the kids to Boone's neighborhood. She described specific things Owen had said. She described Lila's startled responses. She described the difference in both children from the first of those visits to the most recent, and the shape of that difference was unmistakable. Boone had stood on Doris's front step and read all 3.5 pages and then looked up at her. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once and went back inside. The first hearing was on a Monday. Tamsin wore a gray blouse and had her hair pulled simply back. She looked tired, but she was composed. Boone sat in the gallery in the second row. He was wearing the dark blue jacket he had bought for her wedding, the only formal jacket he owned. He had not worn it since. Grady sat at the respondent's table with his attorney, and he looked the way he always looked in any room he believed he was managing. Calm, measured, mildly aggrieved, the picture of a reasonable man baffled by an unreasonable situation. He glanced at Boone once, a look that was not quite a threat and not quite a challenge, something more calculated than either of those. Boone looked back at him with nothing on his face. On the stand, Grady described a difficult marriage to a woman who struggled with anxiety and frequently misinterpreted his attempts to structure their home life as something sinister. He said the word structure several times. He said Tamsin had always been easily overwhelmed. He described Boone as a protective father who had never fully accepted the marriage, who had planted doubts and put ideas in Tamsin's mind. He was articulate and even-toned throughout. He used the word heartbroken once carefully. Velma testified that Tamsin was a nervous and difficult person who needed guidance. She said it with the unshakable certainty of someone who had been saying the same thing for years and had never once had anyone push back on it. Then Rhett cross-examined. He was quiet and methodical and entirely unhurried. He asked Velma whether she had a key to her son's home. Yes. Whether she was present in the home multiple times per week. Yes. Whether she had ever suggested to Tamsin that Tamsin should be more compliant in her marriage. For full seconds of silence. I offered guidance, Velma said carefully. As a mother-in-law. What kind of guidance? Rhett asked. General guidance. About how to be a supportive partner. Can you give me a specific example of the guidance you offered? She could not recall a specific example. Then Tamsin took the stand. She had been coached by Rhett to do one thing. Tell the truth plainly without trying to seem sympathetic, without performing anything. Just describe what happened. She sat in the witness chair with her hands folded on the railing, and she did exactly that. She described the locked bedroom door, the sound of the lock, Owen's face when she finally came out, what he said to her. She described the bruises, how they had started, how she had explained them to herself and to others, how long she had done that. She described what it felt like to stop speaking in the middle of a sentence, because finishing it was not worth the cost. She described the way both children had adapted, Owen's watchfulness, Lila's new quietness in the evenings. And she described Owen asking permission to eat ice cream from his grandfather. The courtroom was very quiet. The evidence that changed everything came from a tablet that had been sitting on the kitchen counter of the house on Birch Court for 2 years. It was a shared family device, the kind you keep out for the kids to use, to watch shows, or look things up for school. Boone had noticed it during one of his visits and mentioned it to Rhett. Rhett had told Tamsin what to do. On a quiet afternoon, alone in the house, she backed up the full contents to a cloud account using the email address she had made for herself on an old phone Boone had bought her, a phone that was registered to his name and kept at his house when she wasn't using it. She had done it in under 15 minutes while Grady was at work and the kids were at school. Rhett introduced the recovered files 14 days after the first hearing. The messages were extensive. Grady had used a chat application on that tablet, linked to his personal account, and the sync had preserved months of conversations. Some were with his attorney, Perkins, and they predated the divorce filing by 8 months. They were detailed and strategic. They discussed how to establish a record of Tamsin's instability. They discussed which incidents could be reframed and how. One message, sent on a Thursday evening, asked whether a history of documented emotional episodes would be sufficient to argue against primary custody. Another discussed what a medical evaluation might reveal if Tamsin was encouraged to seek therapy through a particular referral. There were messages to Velma. In one of them, Grady described an evening in March that Tamsin had already described to the court, the night she was pushed against the wall in the upstairs hallway. He described it without remorse and without any apparent concern that the message might one day be read by anyone else. At the end of the description, he had written, "She needs to understand there are consequences. I don't enjoy this." Rhett read that line aloud in the courtroom. He paused. Then he continued. There was also the recording. Tamsin had recorded it on the old phone 6 weeks before she left. She had known something was shifting. The tension in the house had changed quality, like a pressure building, and she had started keeping the phone in her pocket, just in case. The recording was 47 seconds long. She had captured it through her pocket, standing in the hallway, while Velma spoke to Grady in the kitchen, neither of them aware she was there. Rhett played it through the courtroom speakers. Velma's voice was clear, certain, calm in the way that people are calm when they're saying things they have thought through carefully and believe completely. If she ever gets it in her head to leave, Velma said, you make sure she doesn't take those children. That's your leverage. That's the only thing she really cares about. She wants them, you hold them over her. That's how you keep her where she needs to be. In the courtroom, the judge's pen stopped moving. Boone, sitting in the second row, watched Grady's face. Grady's composure did not shatter. Men like Grady don't shatter. But for a fraction of a second, something showed, an unguarded flash of something that was not quite fear, but was close to it. The look of a man who has just understood that a wall he believed was solid is not. He leaned toward his attorney and murmured something, and his attorney placed a hand on his forearm, quiet, steadying. In that small gesture, a lawyer physically anchoring his client said everything that needed to be said about how the room had shifted. Rhett let the silence run for a long moment after the recording ended. The judge asked for it to be played a second time. It was played a second time. After that, Velma was recalled to the stand. She had the careful look of someone who has just discovered that the floor they are standing on has less surface area than they believed. She said the recording had been taken out of context. She said she didn't recall the specific conversation. She said that what she had meant, if she had said anything like that, was simply that fathers deserve to have their parental rights respected. Rhett asked one question. Is that your voice on the recording, Mrs. Holt? A pause. I believe so, she said. Thank you, Rhett said and sat down. The ruling came on a Friday. Boone had barely slept the night before. Not from fear. He did not feel afraid. Exactly. But from the weight of knowing that everything they had built over the past months would be confirmed or dismantled in a single morning. He lay in bed and listened to the house and thought about Owen and Lila asleep down the hall at Tamsin's apartment, and Tamsin herself, and what it would mean for all of them if the court saw what was in front of it. He drove Tamsin to the courthouse at 8:30. The kids were at Doris's house. When Boone had dropped them off that morning, Doris had met him at the door with a calm and organized presence that made him grateful all over again that she existed. Owen had his stone collection in a plastic bag. He'd started bringing it places, as if having it nearby helped. Lila had fallen asleep on the drive over and was still drowsy, soft and trusting, carried inside without waking. Boone and Tamsin sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. 20 minutes. She had her hands in her lap, one thumb pressing into the other palm. He sat with his arms resting on his knees, looking at the window at the end of the hall, which framed a clean rectangle of autumn sky, pale blue, with one thin cloud moving slowly across it. Whatever happens, she said. I know, he said. No, really, whatever happens, I need you to know I'm okay. I'm going to be okay, even if it doesn't go the way we want. He looked at her. She was looking at the floor, but she meant it. He could hear that she meant it. It's going to be okay, he said. She looked at him. You really believe that? Yeah, he said. I do. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, and they went in. The judge was direct and without ceremony. Full physical and legal custody awarded to Tamsin Keller, effective immediately. Supervised visitation for Grady Holt, restricted to 2 scheduled hours per week in a neutral location, to be reviewed in 6 months based on compliance and behavioral assessment. Emergency restraining order extended to a standing protective order, to remain in effect pending further proceedings. Divorce decree finalized. Velma Holt. No access to the children pending a separate guardian review, given her recorded statements and the evidence of her direct involvement in maintaining the environment of coercive control surrounding the petitioner. Grady's attorney began to speak, and the judge raised one hand. A small gesture, but absolute, and said clearly that she had reviewed the full documentation in detail, that the pattern of coercive control and physical harm was well established by the evidence, and that the court's primary responsibility was to the safety and welfare of the children and of the petitioner. All motions for reconsideration were denied, pending a formal appeal. 8 minutes from gavel to ruling. In the hallway afterward, Tamsin pressed her back against the wall and her hand flat against the plaster beside her. She didn't cry. She breathed. Long, slow breaths, the kind you take when you've been holding something for so long that releasing it has to happen carefully. People moved through the corridor around them. Clerks, attorneys, strangers with their own battles. After a while, she said, "I kept waiting for it to fall apart. I kept thinking he was going to say something, produce something, and everything would go sideways. He had nothing left," Boone said. "We took it away before he got to use it." She turned to look at him. "How did you know? How did you know to be that patient? To just build it piece by piece and not react?" "Because reacting would have cost you your kids," he said. "And there was nothing in the world I was willing to trade for that." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and put her forehead against his shoulder, the way she used to when she was a girl, and something had been hard and was finally over. He put his arm around her and didn't say anything. 2 weeks after the ruling, the district attorney's office announced the opening of a criminal investigation. Red had forwarded the full case file to the DA's office the same week the ruling came through. The investigation moved with a speed that told Boone the prosecutors had been watching for a case like this, documented, organized, with evidence that needed no interpretation. The charges came 6 weeks later. Domestic abuse, 3 counts covering a period of 18 months. Unlawful confinement, 1 count for the locked bedroom. Tampering with communications, 1 count for the confiscated phone. The morning Boone heard about the arrest, he was in his driveway, checking the oil in his truck before work. His neighbor called over the fence to tell him. He listened, wiped his hands on a rag, and thanked her. Then he went back to checking the oil. Grady Holt was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and released on bond pending trial. And what Boone thought about, when he heard the details later that day, the image that settled into his mind and stayed there, was not the arrest itself. It was a moment 2.5 years earlier, when Grady had walked through his own front door and thrown his keys onto the entry table with a sound that was meant to be heard. The sound of a man depositing ownership. The sound of someone who had never once considered that the world might not hold that shape forever. It had not held that shape. Velma Holt lost access to the grandchildren completely when the formal Guardian review returned its findings. The document was unsparing. It cited her recorded statements, her documented presence in the household over a multi-year period, and her active participation in maintaining the conditions the court had found harmful. Her attorney filed an application for reconsideration. It was denied. The voice that had always known how things worked, that had offered quiet certainty at dinner tables and in kitchen corners, that had shaped the contours of Tamsin's daily life for years, had nothing left to be certain about. The leaves were down by October. Boone raked them on a Saturday morning while Owen rode his bicycle in wide loops up and down the driveway, and Lila worked at a pile of fallen leaves with focused, scientific concentration, sorting them by color. The red ones to the left, the yellow ones to the right, the brown ones set aside because she hadn't decided where they went yet. Tamsin was inside, making soup. Boone could smell it from the yard, something with herbs and something warm and dense, and it smelled like a house where someone was comfortable enough to cook slowly. He raked and watched the kids and said nothing. Owen was different now. Not completely. There were still moments when he caught himself before doing something, still moments when a loud sound made him look up with that old alert expression. Some of that might never fully go away, and Boone understood that. But the boy laughed now. He left things on the floor and forgot about them. He had opinions about things that had nothing to do with keeping the peace. He had started that stone collection, dozens of rocks from parks and streams and his grandmother's driveway, sorted by size and color on a shelf in his room. And he could talk about it for 20 minutes without stopping, which was exactly the kind of thing a child should be able to do. Lila had started calling him Booney. He had decided he preferred it. Tamsin's new apartment was in a quiet part of the east side, close to a good school and a park with a creek. Ground floor, 2 bedrooms, a small backyard that was mostly concrete but had a raised garden bed along the fence. She had already bought seeds. She had plans for spring. She had a new job, a step up, more responsibility, more money, at a medical practice 15 minutes from the apartment. She had bought herself a coffee maker she actually liked, one she had researched and chosen herself. And she had mentioned it to Boone twice in the same week. The way you mention something small that carries more meaning than it seems to. The bruises had been gone for months. Boone was sitting on the back step with his coffee, watching the kids, when Tamsin came out and sat beside him. She had a mug of her own, and she pulled her knees up and wrapped both hands around it and looked at the yard. "I've been thinking about something," she said. He waited. "I said once that I thought staying quiet was protecting them, keeping things calm." She paused. "I've been thinking about that differently lately." "How so?" "I think I knew something was wrong for a long time. Years, probably. I just couldn't figure out how to know it and keep going at the same time. So I put it somewhere. In the back. I didn't look at it." "That's not weakness," he said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not beating myself up over it. I want to understand it. What kept me there? Because I don't want Owen to grow up and wonder why his mother stayed. I want to be able to explain it to him one day when he's old enough to ask." Boone thought about that. "Tell him the truth," he said. "That you were protecting him and your sister every single day with everything you had, and that it was the hardest thing you've ever done, and that the moment you saw a way out that didn't cost you both of them, you took it." She looked at him. "He'll understand that," Boone said. She was quiet for a moment. Owen had stopped his bike at the end of the driveway and was examining something on the ground. A stone, probably. He picked it up, turned it over, considered it, and put it in his jacket pocket with the care of someone adding to a collection that matters. "Were you scared?" Tamsin asked. "During all of it? Be honest." He considered lying. It would have been easy. Instead, he said, "Every time I drove away from that house and left you there. Every single time. You didn't show it. Showing it wasn't going to help you." She nodded slowly. She looked down at her coffee. Then she looked back at the yard, and something in her face was open and easy in a way it hadn't been in a long time. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't say anything. He drank his coffee. From across the yard, Owen called something to Lila, and Lila shrieked and ran, and Owen chased her in a wide circle with his arms out, and they both collapsed laughing into the pile of sorted leaves that Lila had spent the better part of an hour organizing. Lila sat up in the scattered leaves, completely unbothered, and started sorting them again. Tamsin laughed. It came up from somewhere deep and easy and real, and it filled the yard and the cool morning air around it, and Boone sat on the back step and listened to it. He could not remember the last time he had heard it. He knew, sitting there with his coffee and the October air on his face, that he would not forget this. Some people, when they hear a story like this, wait for the dramatic moment. The confrontation. The scene where the good man stands up and makes things right in a way that everyone can see and admire. They want the moment where he raises his voice, or makes a call that changes everything in an instant, or faces the villain in a hallway and says the thing that ends it. Boone Keller had no moment like that. He never raised his voice at Grady Holt. He never made a scene. He never showed up at a door with an ultimatum or made a threat or acted on the fury he carried quietly in his chest every single day. He was a mechanic. He had spent his adult life understanding that broken things are not fixed with force. They're fixed with patience, with the right tools, with a clear understanding of what is actually wrong and what needs to happen in what order. He watched. He wrote things down. He asked the right person the right questions at the right time. He showed up at the house with a ladder and a light bulb and a paper bag of ice cream. And he made himself part of the daily life of that house. And he paid attention to every single thing he saw. He did not rush. He did not guess. He did not act on emotion when acting on emotion would have cost Tamsin everything. He waited for the moment when the evidence was solid, when his daughter was ready, when the plan was complete. And when that moment came, he moved. He did not ask her to be braver than she was capable of being. He did not blame her for the years it took. He understood. And he had always understood, even from that first evening in the kitchen when she told him she couldn't lose her kids, that her silence was not surrender. It was calculation. It was survival. It was a woman doing the only math available to her, in a situation that had been designed to make every exit look like a loss. He had made her a promise, without ever saying it in those words. He had promised her, with his notebook and his patience and his Saturday visits and his phone calls to Rhett Carver, that she would not lose her children. He kept it. And the people who had built a life around her smallness, who had used her love for her children as something to control her with, who had spent years dismantling her sense of herself one quiet incident at a time, who had been so certain she would never find a way out. Those people discovered something that men like Grady Holt rarely discover until it's too late. They discovered what happens when a woman finally has someone in her corner who is more patient than they are. Grady Holt's trial moved forward slowly, as these things do. But it moved. There was no version of the evidence that could be explained away. The messages, the recording, the 14 months of documentation, the testimony of a woman who had finally found her voice in a courtroom and used it clearly, all of it was there. When it finished, he had no access to his children and a criminal record that would define him for the rest of his life. Velma Holt had no access either. The certainty that had shaped her for decades about how things worked, about what women owed their husbands, about the kind of control that was acceptable if it kept the household together, that certainty had nowhere left to go. Boone Keller went back to his life. His shifts, his quiet house, his early mornings. He did not talk about what he had done. He did not need anyone to know the details of the plan, the months of notes, the careful strategy. He did not need credit for it. He had done it for Tamsin. On a Saturday in October, he sat on the back step of his daughter's new apartment and watched his grandchildren play in a yard full of scattered leaves, and he drank his coffee, and he listened to his daughter laugh. That was enough.